Now I turn to our last speaker in session one, who really needs no introduction. So I will be very brief. Professor Cheong Siew, one of the organizers of this particular venture here. He was born in Singapore. He was educated at the National University of Singapore with a BS in physics, then went on to Cornell University where he got his PhD, and he is now assistant professor here at NTU in physics and applied physics since 2007. And as you heard this morning, he is very much engaged in the kind of activities we are discussing here. And he comes from a particular approach, namely dealing with large amounts of data in complex adaptive systems. And the complex adaptive systems that are most studied anywhere in the world are financial markets, it's also the brain, it's in the area of the life sciences, but it is also turning towards infectious diseases and now also to cultural heritage. So we are very much looking forward to hear work in progress and achievements. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Novotny, for the introduction. Professor Novotny actually neglected to mention Andrea's role in this thing here. So this was actually a conversation that was started 2 years ago, when 3 years ago, when we first came up with the idea of organizing a series of conferences on heritage as a complex system. Of course, at that point in time, I did not have any good thing to say. I mean, I don't have any meaningful thing to say about heritage. Of course, I have lots of good things to say about heritage. And coming from a complexity science background, I didn't know what kind of contributions I could make. But over the years, of course, our thoughts crystallized with more and more dialogue. And that's why, Andrea's role in formalizing this theory cannot be understated. And let me bring you through this theory a little bit by first introducing the problem. So last year, we celebrated the 50th year of our independence. So the question is, where do we go from now on? So obviously, Sheila gave a very good visionario on Singapore as an economic success story. I think there's nobody that doubts this. It's amazing that a country can go from third world to first in a short span of about less than 50 years. And as we are celebrating SG50, so what are we going to do next? So are we going towards SG 100? And obviously there were a lot of conferences as well as workshops that were organized to think about what it is that we want to achieve 50 years from now. There's of course the Future of Us exhibition that is going on right now. Think about how Singapore as a society will be like, or will we then want to go back to SG 0? Because maybe for some of those of us who were born around the 60s or 70s, as kids, we would enjoy running around in mud roads and all the stuff. Maybe we don't want to give up that kind of lifestyle. We want to regress back towards that. And of course, there's no denying that we've lost a lot along the way. This is a picture of the Singapore River before it was cleaned up. So if you have not seen this picture before, it's okay. If you've been to Singapore River before, maybe you're not close enough to see the river, actually the first senses that alerts you to the presence of Singapore River is your nose. Okay, you can smell it first before you can see it. Okay, so that's one thing that we have lost. This is a picture of the kind of old streets around Chinatown. We haven't lost these buildings, but we have lost this kind of vitality. Nowadays, most of these are either law firms or very posh cafes, and they don't look like this anymore. So this building obviously is still here, but there are a lot more buildings that have grown up alongside it. This is the Singapore, I think the National Theatre. This building no longer exists. We have torn it down in the name of progress. And So this building was also torn down in the name of progress, and that progress goes by the name of Singapore Management University. Okay, I mean I'm not trying to make fun of them, but this is where some of their buildings actually sit on right now. And I had very fond memories of going to this particular building because some of the reference book I can only find in this main branch of the National Library. Of course, now the National Library occupies a newer and spankier building just beside Bras Basah Complex. I have no complaints about that building either. Now this is another building that we might stand to lose, but can anyone recognize whose house this is? Nobody, I guess so. Okay, I hear somebody. This is Lee Kuan Yew's house. Okay, so since so few of you recognize as Lee Kuan Yew's house means that probably it's not so important. Okay? Okay, so I am a complexity scientist, so I guess part of my job alongside with Professor Tainter is to educate you on what we already know about complex systems. So I put here the title to contrast three paradigms. Simple systems versus complicated systems versus complex systems. So this is a simple system. It is a Newton's cradle. It's a toy. You lift up one of the steel balls, you let it go, you'll keep going, tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. And the behavior is very easy to understand if you know some physics. If you don't know any physics, you will realize that the only two bits, the only two balls that move is this one and the end. The three in the middle will not move at all because of the principle of conservation of linear momentum, but we don't have to talk about that. So this is very simple, very small number of variables, very easy to predict behavior. This is a complicated system. Why is the car a complicated system? It has 30,000 parts. But it doesn't have 30,000 different kinds of behavior. It has 3 behaviors in total. If you step on the accelerator, it goes faster. If you step on the brake, it goes slower. If you turn the steering wheel, it goes to the left or to the right. And certainly you don't want to be in a car, when you turn the steering wheel left, it goes backwards, right? So that would be what normally a complex system would do. So a human crowd is actually a complex system. It's very difficult to steer a human crowd if you ever tried doing it. So you can put up signs, say that, oh, go here, but they will go the other side. Okay? It's just part of human nature to not trust all the signs that are put up. You can have marshals, yes, but then they know if you ask them to speed up, they will just walk at their own pace because what can you do to them, right? There's a million of these people down there. You have only one marshal. Okay? So the difference, this contrast between simple and complicated versus complex is easy to understand. Complex systems have behaviors that are very difficult to predict, very difficult to control, and so complex system, the hallmark of a complex system is that it is made of many parts. So this has few parts. It can never hope to be complex. A car has many parts, yes, but the parts need to interact strongly and not in non-linear fashion. The car's many components does not do that. The engineers did a good job to make sure that the different components actually interact weakly so that the car can be controlled, but in a human crowd, because everybody is trying to make a decision. I want to overtake you, you want to overtake me, so in the end, we all get stuck somewhere in a very narrow gate. And of course, there's also, this is the most important hallmark of a complex system, is that there is a hierarchy of emergent behaviors. Behaviors that you do not expect from a single person, but you get from a human crowd. And Philip Anderson, a Nobel laureate in physics, famously said that a complex system is one in which the whole is not only greater than the sum of parts, but it's also different from the sum of parts. And frequently, a lot of these kind of complex systems, especially complex social systems, they are adaptive. So they adapt to the situation. So they exhibit a whole range of emergent behaviors, but this range of emergent behaviors can change when the environment changes. Okay? And the other aspect of a complex system that is not well understood is this notion of robustness and regime shift. So here I show a bunch of actors and their interactions. So the green dots are actors, the red lines are interactions between them. This is a fairly sparse system of actors. Here you see the same number of actors, but they're now far more interconnected. Okay? Now, if you do something to this situation, this system here, let's say you decrease the amount of wealth, so there's economic downturn. So the wealth level of every individual will kind of will decrease like this. Whereas for this more interconnected society, they will be able to maintain their wealth at a fairly high level until past a critical point where the total wealth will just drop and become very close to zero. So this system here is said to be robust against external changes, but at the same time, once you're past a critical point, it will just undergo a regime shift. So this forms the background of complexity theory that you would know to appreciate the kind of things I'm going to say about heritage. So first of all, we must understand heritage in the context of man, well, I mean, not necessarily just men, but men and women, humans, the landscape on which we operate on, as well as the heritage that emerges actually out from the interaction between actors and the landscape. So we start from a community that existed, that kind of started in 1850. So you see here there are actors, and there are buildings, of course, part of the landscape. And then, of course, the lines show interaction between them. Okay? So fast forward 50 years, you find that you have some of the old actors are still there, but now you have new actors, of course. New people are being born all the time. And, of course, you also can find new interactions. So people get to know each other, and they go for coffee now regularly. But more importantly, you find stronger interactions. Because of repeated interaction, these social ties become stronger over time. And then fast forward another 50 years, what you now find is that there are now new buildings on the landscape. This is necessary because when the community grows, obviously they will need to have new buildings to serve other functions. But also you find, well, the inevitable. Some of the old actors who have died. Okay? And especially if I go back a little bit. Okay, so this is an old actor that died from 1900 to 1950. And you can see that it has a lot of interactions with many other actors, and it has many strong interactions with other actors. So you can think of this actor as a key actor. And after it died, obviously, its function is lost. So people will remember this person, but he's gone forever. And obviously, beside the new building and the old actor dying, you have new actors, not so important, but you have now a new key actor starts to fill the place of the old key actor. Okay? And then what the other things that you might see would be that there was a whole bunch of strong interactions here. Now you start to see them replicating across the landscape. Okay? And that's now fast forward to 2000. What we see is there's one new building, but one old building was demolished. And if you remember, maybe you don't. Okay, you see that here there is a strong interaction pattern with the building. After the building was demolished, the strong interaction disappeared. Okay, so this is unfortunate. If we didn't understand it, we knocked down one building and we have happened to destroy some community ties at the same time. But at the same time, there is this intense replication of strong interactions around the key actor. It's now spreading out very healthily. And more importantly, because this kind of spreading is centered around this old building becomes culturally significant. So, from this simple thought process, thought experiment, we can now identify a theory of processes, the processes that are important for heritage. So first of all, we know that there must be replication. So the replication means replication across space. So something that starts here in Jurong West will be replicated first in Bukit Batok, then in Choa Chu Kang, then across to Toa Payoh and stuff like that. So this will be replication across space. It must be transmitted across generations, otherwise it cannot be thought of as a heritage. But while these two things are happening, there will also be transformation. Because the actors involved are different. So it is never possible for these kind of strong interaction to be transmitted as is. There will be changes to adapt so that the actors can adapt it to their needs where they are, when they are. So these are the things that are important. And these kind of strong human-to-human interaction patterns we can identify as intangible cultural heritage. So pretty much all intangible cultural heritage is just human-to-human interaction patterns that grew stronger over time, and they may be one form or the another, but they are all of this nature. And of course, we can have potential enhancement of human-human interaction by landscape features, And then those can be tangible architectural or natural heritage. And then, so we understand, therefore, through this simple thought experiment, that there is a symbiotic relationship between intangible cultural heritage and tangible cultural heritage. So intangible cultural heritage cannot exist in a vacuum. It exists on a landscape with landscape features, and these landscape features can help to enhance the replication and transmission of intangible cultural heritage. But at the same time, the thought experiment was kind of too high level. It was a bird's eye view, but the view from an eagle. Let's go further down to the ground to see what more we can understand by discussing these kind of processes in greater detail. Let's say we have this beautiful landscape. There's a tree, a banyan tree, let's say, and a bunch of roses. There's butterflies, there are birds, all very nice. And then because it's so nice, someone built a temple here. Okay? And then it starts to attract devotees. So the devotees are coming. And this person is not a devotee, but he just arranged to meet some of his friends here. Okay? And then because there's now a lot of people in this place, someone decided that it would be good business to set up some cooked food here, and the cooked food becomes an intangible cultural heritage. So both the religious interactions mediated by the temple, as well as the culinary interactions mediated by this particular food store becomes intangible cultural heritage. The temple itself becomes tangible architectural heritage. And because when young kids are brought to temples, they don't understand what the adults are doing. They tend to look at the butterflies and the bees. And so their memory of the temple is always together with the big tree and the flowers. And this part here can then become natural heritage. So this is now a closer snapshot of heritage processes in action. But in order to perform measurement, and I'm a scientist, I always believe in measurements. So there's nothing that in this world that cannot be measured. If it cannot be measured, then maybe we're not doing it right. So how do we measure, how do we perform measurements on heritage? Especially, of course, if we want to understand how strongly this kind of processes are replicating, how strongly it is transmitting across generations, and how much changes per replication are we expecting to see. What we need to do, if we do collect the correct kind of data, and in order to understand the data involved, we have to look at traditional media as well as new media. So in traditional media, observers of these kind of processes may actually write articles about them. They might write poems, they might write books about this particular place, this particular store, the natural heritage. They might also actually do paintings of the places. So for example, paintings of the temple, they might just take photographs. In the old days, it is difficult to take a photograph because you have to buy an expensive camera and you have to actually develop the film and develop the positives. Or you may be a little bit more artistic. You write music and you write music or songs about the place, or you develop a theater and dance associated with the practices here, or in new media. So nowadays, new media presents a great opportunity because the instances become far more numerous than with traditional media. So we have blogs, tweets, and Facebook posts. We can have YouTube videos. So people like to post YouTube videos for no good reason at all, but that's to our advantage. And then, of course, you can have people posting to Flickr or posting to Instagram. So we need to understand these kind of cultural heritage processes from the data that is collected. So based on this discussion, let me now talk a little bit about the principles of qualitative assessment, based on the fact that all processes that humans actually undertake leave behind data trails. So first of all, not all the media types are equal. Okay? Because dances and drama take more time to create than to paintings and songs. So if there is an instance of a drama associated with a heritage, then this gives more weight than the number of the paintings and songs that are created. And of course, paintings and songs take more time to create than the photographs, especially nowadays. So you give more weight to paintings and songs. At the same time, not all media instances of the same type are equal. Painting by masters carry more weight than paintings by novices. Photograph by famous photographer takes more weight than photographs by novices. The reason for that is because these people's time, the time of the masters and the famous photographer, they cost more than the time of ordinary people. Okay? And of course, not all heritage sites are equal. I did a simple comparison, and I found this to be true. You can contest it, but at least based on the data type. Tiong Bahru has the full list of data type. That means all the traditional media plus new media that I showed in the previous slide. You can find them for Tiong Bahru, but Bukit Brown only has a smaller subset. Okay? And not all artifacts in a single heritage site are equal, because actually if you look at all the paintings and photographs of Tiong Bahru, they show nearly the same building. So it's either this building or the one next to it, but not other buildings in the estate. Okay? Now, what about quantitative? So qualitative is good. We can already make assessments of maybe which this site is more important than that site for now, and maybe we want to start thinking about conservation efforts for the more important site, because ultimately resources are limited. We can only do one thing at a time. What about quantitative? Can we really measure how important a heritage is? And we can perform direct measurements. For example, we can measure the population cross-section involved. How many people are involved in here? We can measure the spatial extensivity. Is this a widespread thing, or is this just very localized? We can also measure the temporal intensity. That means, is this something that is very frequent, or is it very rare? Is it once a week, or is it once a year? Okay? And this is harder to understand, but we can also perform correlation measurements. And what we're trying to do is, if we try to do correlation measurement, we are trying to map out the intangible cultural heritage ecosystem. Because let's say a visit to the temple is for religious purposes, but then after that I step out and I satisfy my craving for Hokkien mee or char kway teow just outside the temple, and that is a different heritage function. And then after that I may just go on to watch movie with my friends. That is yet another function. So we must think of human interactions as interconnected processes, so they form an ecosystem together. And the most important heritage would be those that are most central in this kind of ICH ecosystem. So because they act as some kind of support for other ICH practices, you remove the temple and the food store run out of business, and the movie theater runs out of business, even though by themselves they seem to be doing well. Okay? So I try to not just give this presentation as a purely theoretical exercise, so I did a simple case study of Tiong Bahru. This is where Tiong Bahru is when you look at Singapore as a whole. This is where Tiong Bahru is. These are old maps. It is one of the oldest housing estates in Singapore, built over a former Chinese cemetery. This is developed in the 90s, and then it was upper-class enclave before World War II, about 30 apartment blocks, 900 built units. It has unique architectural style. You don't find the architectural style here in other Singapore housing estates. There was a period where there was population decline, and right now it's actually undergoing gentrification, and is surprisingly popular with tourists. So here's some evidence that it's popular with tourists. So this is actually CNN Travel. So they are advertising Tiong Bahru to maybe Americans who are likely to travel to Singapore to go to this place. This unique Singapore experience. Don't go to the zoo, go to Tiong Bahru. Okay? Okay? Now, let's perform some kind of qualitative assessment of Tiong Bahru. So pictures. So this is one of the pictures. This is another picture. This is yet another picture of Tiong Bahru. So photographs, no problem. We can find them. Paintings. Yes, we can also find paintings of Tiong Bahru. These are not, of course, by masters. These are by amateurs. But nonetheless, a painting takes more time to actually create than photographs. So someone actually has spent the effort to create the photographs. And then, of course, there were 8 artists who actually wrote original songs and poems to celebrate Tiong Bahru. So they felt strongly enough about Tiong Bahru that they spent the time to write songs and write poems. The poem is not very good, so this is one of them. Okay. And more importantly, MediaCorp has actually created a TV drama based on Tiong Bahru. So the title of the drama is 118. It's TV series, serious TV series that explores the divide between the older generation of Singaporeans and the newer generation of Singaporeans, their aspirations and stuff like that. Again, it is not very well written because it doesn't really matter that this is set in Tiong Bahru, it can be set in Holland Village or Toa Payoh, probably the same thing will happen. Okay? Now, let me go back a little bit. Now I want to go on and do quantitative assessment. Then I run into a problem. I find that we don't actually have enough data, and the data is not of the right kind. So first of all, let's think about measuring population cross-sections. I did that, and I found that, okay, the census data, they are 5 years apart, not a very good indicator. And also, people living there can be new residents, so they don't feel as strongly connected to Tiong Bahru as some of the people who might have moved out. So we don't get the full cross-section. And also, we don't get the foreign cross-section. So a heritage site is important not simply because of the people who live there, but people who have come into contact with it and feel that there's a special bond being formed from that kind of encounter. So if we are going to do quantitative measurement on Tiong Bahru, what kind of processes are we going to measure? So I thought about this a little bit, and I found that Tiong Bahru felt very ordinary. It felt just like any other Singaporean town. So what is it that, if there's nothing special, then why are we trying to preserve it? So it turns out that I am looking at the question in the wrong direction. I'm asking the question the wrong way. It feels ordinary because it feels like any other common Singaporean town, but perhaps it is because it feels common like any other Singaporean town because it was the first. So there might be some practice, some social interaction pattern that first started in Tiong Bahru and then got replicated rapidly around the rest of Singapore. And therefore, that's why we know if you're asked to think about it, it becomes very common. And this is what I claim it is. This is the Home-Market-Coffeeshop pattern that is very common, that was probably first created in Tiong Bahru and then spread out all over Singapore. So this is the wet market. Tiong Bahru has the first wet market in Singapore, where you consolidate all the grocery sellers into one single place. Before that, they were spread over maybe 1 square kilometers or 2 square kilometers, and you have to walk a long distance to get all your marketing done. But because it is consolidated, now you can get your marketing done in half an hour, unless you are very interested in the actual pricing itself. Then you have a lot of time in the morning. So you could go to the nearby coffee shop, sit down, and you will find your neighbors there, your friends there. You sit down, you have a cup of coffee, you chat. So here's another picture of a traditional coffee shop that you might find in Tiong Bahru. I think this one, yes, indeed, you can find. Is this? No, this is not the actual one in Tiong Bahru. So this template is found throughout older Singapore. So most of the older towns in Singapore has this kind of template, a central marketplace, a lot of coffee shops nearby, and is likely to first come into existence in Tiong Bahru because it has the first wet market in Singapore, and it is also the first place where you have this concentration of home to wet market to coffee shops. And I would claim that this is a unique way of life in Singapore because it is not really found elsewhere in the world at the same intensity. So if you think about it, is there something like this in Malaysia? And the answer is that this combination of three functional areas, they are not that near together. If you think about China, again, you don't find them this close to each other. If you think about US or Europe, again, you don't find them very close to each other. And therefore, this is perhaps what makes the people, the residents of Tiong Bahru, feel so strongly attached to that place because you form very strong bonds if you sit down every day, or maybe not every day, every week, for 2 to 3 hours drinking coffee with someone. And of course, this kind of heritage is good because it actually enhances social cohesion and possibly, enhances resilience when there are disasters and stuff like that. You can possibly recover more quickly because people can know each other and trust each other. Okay, but is this a lifestyle at risk? And that's potentially true. Nowadays, the URA and HDB has stopped building wet markets. So, I mean, those of you who are Singaporeans know this. Instead, they have spaces left for supermarkets, like NTUC or Prime. And then instead of the traditional coffee shop, now you have food courts, coffee shops like this, or modern cafes like this. In fact, the younger people prefer to go to places like this than to go to places like this. And here they are studying. Okay, maybe eventually it's going to become an intangible cultural heritage that they study in cafes. But we see that, of course, there's a lot of displacement of old coffee shop by modern cafes and food courts. The wet markets themselves are displaced by supermarkets. And there's also a faster pace of life. Nowadays, it's hard to find a friend who will sit down with you for 3 hours to drink coffee. Maybe half an hour, say, I have to go, I have something to do. Okay? So no more morning coffee with friends and neighbors. But then again, this threat here is maybe also an opportunity for us to rethink urban planning and township designs. The newer towns don't have this kind of elements built in close proximity. Because what happens is that now instead of this kind of design, they have at the center of the town square, the transport hub. Right? Very convenient. I go downstairs, I buy my coffee, I get on the bus or the train or whatever, and I get out. So there is now a lot of time to interact with the train and the bus, but not enough time to interact with our neighbors. So maybe that there can be some rethink in urban planning based on these findings. And certainly there is a lot of implications if we take this shift theory of heritage as a complexity theory seriously. First of all, documentation. We need to identify the processes, and this may not be obvious because the processes may be so common that we don't see them. Okay, so the things that are closest to us tend to be invisible. So when we identify the processes, we need to identify the replication process, the transmission process, and the transformation process. What are the institutions involved, and what are the rates? Okay, and obviously it will be important to map out the intangible cultural heritage landscape and ecosystem so that we know where this particular practice lies in the bigger scheme of things. Okay, so there are centrality and dependencies that are important. And then for planning, obviously, if we want to think about sustainable development, we want to leverage on the strongest processes to drive development. Now, the strongest processes are also the most invisible because they are not at risk of being displaced, so you don't even think about them at all. But if we can identify them, we can actually we can use them to drive development. And obviously, we want to think about preservation of intangible cultural heritage, not at the individual level, but at the ecosystem level. For example, if you talk to ecologists, they will say that it's okay that 1 or 2 species die out because they will be replaced by other species. So same kind of things can happen here. If 1 or 2 practices die out because there's simply no more people practicing them anymore, it's okay if they are replaced by other practices that enhance the social cohesion and resilience of the community. And of course, if we think about projects for the future, it is entirely possible that not all current practices are desirable or sustainable. Personally, I hate tuition. Okay, but no laughter here, because maybe not enough parents here. And we might want to think of some kind of teleological design to go from the present ICH ecosystem to a desired one. So this is by design work. So we are still very far away from something like this, but this is entirely possible within a complexity framework for intangible cultural heritage. So to conclude, I've presented a complex systems perspective on heritage. I've introduced the sustainable heritage impact factor theory that's developed through continuous dialogue between me and Andrea. And this is divided into 2 things. So a theory of processes, and a theory of data, what to expect from the data, how to treat the data. And I presented a case study on Tiong Bahru. Unfortunately, I could not tell you something more conclusive because data is simply not available. I have some ideas how to collect those kind of data, but some of those are a little intrusive. And then, of course, there are policy implications on how to do the documentation and how to do the planning. So perhaps the kind of data that we're missing right now, a proper documentation exercise will provide us with those kind of data, and then we can really work out what the transmission rates are, replication rates are, and the transformation rates are, and whether or not this kind of intangible cultural heritage is at risk of dying out or it is going on healthily, and whether we can actually leverage it for further development. So that's all. Thank you.